They thought the worst had come for him when arrows sang and steel took his breath. They thought the bravest hour had ended in a clean, honorable collapse on the field. He did not die. He opened his eyes to damp stone, to the sour air of cell and corridor, to the coppery taste of blood and fear. The clink of iron rings, the scratch of a quill on parchment, the muffled laughter of men who measured flesh in coin. These became his sentence. This was not the brief, glorious pain of a mortal wound. This was the slow arithmetic of a man reduced to value, to line items on a ledger, to a name to be sold back to his family if they could pay. It is easier, many believed, to meet the blade than to live through the ledger. Why? Because capture carried a different death, a death of freedom, of reputation, and of the small mercies that make one human. If you want the kind of history that smells of wet wool, hears the scrape of iron, and feels the thud of a heart bargaining for its life, and if you appreciate narratives told like a candle guttering in a wind tunnel, like and subscribe, and stay with me as we pull the leather curtain back on the merciless arithmetic of captivity in the Middle Ages.
The cold iron and the locked gate. In the immediate aftermath of battle, the field is an orchestra of groans, the metallic tang of blood, the low whicker of injured horses. This chapter follows a captured knight from the fall of his standard to the first days in confinement. We will stitch sensory details into a tapestry of humiliation, the weight of chain against the wrist, the grit of bread that tastes of straw, the slurry of urine and wilted straw beneath a cut. It's here, on the ground level, that fear mutates into dread, that the abstract concept of being taken hardens into the knowledge of a number, a ransom sum, and the legal and social apparatus that makes that number matter. I will explore the rituals of surrender, the handling of noble prisoners by captors who were sometimes more pragmatists than monsters, and the small cruelties that were legal and expected. Confiscation of arms and banners, the inventorying of valuables, the removal of heraldic devices that marked men as property and currency. Where sources allow, I will name practices and cite the uncertainties. Historians debate the exact conditions in different regions and centuries, and where the record is patchy, I will say so. Expect close-up, human moments, an old squire bargaining for his lord's life, a priest offering both absolution and practical counsel, a captor's ledger crossed by quill, and under it, a price.
The price of a man, ransom and ledger. Ransom was not simply paperwork, it was a language of power, a currency of humiliation. This chapter pulls back to show how ransoms were negotiated, calculated, and enforced. We will examine who set the price. Was it the captor, the market, the captive's rank, the political utility of his survival, and how that price could be as ruinous as any battlefield maiming. The tale will show families forced to mortgage lands, sell livestock, and barter futures to recover a single body. A look at the roles of intermediaries, clergy, merchants, and sometimes women of influence who negotiated in whispers and veiled threats. The sensory world here differs from the cell. It is perfumed with candle smoke and old paper, with the metallic ring of coins on a counting board, with the hush of corridors where treaties were drafted. We will discuss how ransom became a mini-economy, an expectation that shaped campaigns, encouraged prisoners to be kept alive for profit rather than killed, and yet introduced perverse incentives. Historians read the evidence differently. Some argue ransoms codified as chivalric restraint. Others insist they reveal cynicism and cruelty. I will present both views and let the moral horror show through, the way families were bled, reputations stained, and the captive himself turned into an asset on which others balanced their fortunes.
The slow dying, humiliation, imprisonment, and mutilation. Captivity could be commerce, but it could also become punishment, pure and unsanctioned. This chapter descends into the darker practices and rarer but brutal outcomes of capture. We will meet the jails,
the dungeons and oubliettes that smell of rot, and the slow erasure of a man's body and mind. We will describe the pillory's public shame, the chains of a galley when that fate fell upon low-born captives, and the terrible exceptions when nobles were tortured or mutilated as statement rather than for profit. The prose will be unflinching but measured. Scalp, amputation, branding. When the record allows, we will name practices. When it doesn't, we will mark them as rumor or prosecutor's claim. Sensory detail will be stark. The rasp of a file against bone, the sting of salt in an untreated wound, the suffocating press of damp stone that makes hope itself brittle. This chapter also explores psychological violence, rumor used as weapon, the deliberate withholding of news to blackmail families, the stripping away of insignia so a man might return wordless. Where sources are contested, we will present the debates honestly. Some chroniclers dramatized capture to shame rivals. Others understated cruelty to preserve reputations. Even so, the human cost is indisputable. Captivity could leave a man alive, yet beyond the compass of his former life.
The Kingdom's Ledger: Politics, War, and the Economics of Capture. Now, widen the lens. Capture did not happen in a vacuum. It was woven into the fabric of medieval diplomacy, warfare, and social order. This chapter looks at how rulers used prisoners as bargaining chips in treaties, how captors could leverage a noble's life for territorial concessions, and how the expectation of ransom shaped military strategy, sometimes encouraging restraint, sometimes incentivizing raids for profit. We will follow how chronicles record negotiations across borders, how treaties specified prisoner exchanges, and how the commerce of captivity could influence a campaign's length or a kingdom's treasury. Sensory cues here are grander: the smell of incense in a negotiation tent, the rattle of armor as envoys pace while a seal is considered, the hush of court chambers as a sovereign considers whether to free a man for the price of peace. Yet the chapter also traces the darker economic ripples: dispossessed peasants, tax burdens raised to pay ransoms, and the moral calculus of leaders who weighed a single life against a realm's stability. Historians disagree on how central ransom economics were to medieval war, and where evidence thins, I will flag it, offering cautious inferences rather than certainty. Memory and myth, legacy, story, and the modern gaze. Finally, we will trace how the fear of capture lodged in memory and myth. This video examines ballads, courtly literature, and later historians' framing of captivity. Did knights really prefer death over capture as a code of honor? Or did literature romanticize that preference to serve a chivalric ideal? We will interrogate the legends and the records, consider how humiliation was transmuted into moral lesson or nationalist myth, and reflect on what the medieval preoccupation with ransom and captivity tells us about power and vulnerability in any age. Sensory material will be subtler: the smell of old pages, the scratch of a copyist's hand centuries after events, the warmth of a tavern where the tale is told anew. The conclusion will be reflective and elegiac. Captivity is not only physical, it is social death, and erasure of agency that even survival cannot heal. Where the historical record leaves gaps, I will present these as rumor or scholarly contention, and I will return the tale to the human scale. The soldier who came back to a home that had sold his fields, the lord whose honor could not be bought no matter the coins. The question at the heart of all of this is blunt and terrible. What is freedom worth? And at what cost do we rescue a life that has already been looted of itself?
The ledger closes not with a neat sum, but with the rusted hush of things that cannot be bought back. A life returned, pockets lighter, a house mortgaged, a name altered by rumor. We have walked the damp corridors and the candlelit chambers, heard the rasp of quills and the metallic clink of coins, watched families barter futures for a single breathing body. We have listened to clerics whisper absolution while merchants counted, to captors who measured worth and to captives who counted blessings smaller than breath. Whether ransom was an expression of chivalry, a cynical market, or some cruel mixture of both, depends on which chronicle you trust and which gap in the record you are willing to fill with conjecture. Yet the arithmetic of capture is plain. Survival could feel like a second death, and freedom, once sold, was never quite the same.
What lingers is not just the horror recorded on parchment, but the quiet human ruin behind it. The returned knight whose fields were sold, the squire who learned that honor can be auctioned, the child who grew up with an empty chair at the table. History keeps telling us that power can measure flesh, and that societies invent ledgers to explain away their choices. Say what you will about medieval codes and heroic myths, but the deeper story is about vulnerability, how societies treat those who fall, how dignity is weighed against coin, and how memory reshapes brutality into legend. If this exploration moved you, tell me which detail haunted you most. And if you want more of these slow, candlelit histories told with the grit and hush they deserve, like and subscribe, and return when you are ready to peel another layer from the past.